but Daniel Dennett, in an interview on TV with Charlie Rose, being an atheist, was asked, well, are you absolutely an atheist? Well, he says, if you define God the way Anselm does in the ontological argument, as that than which nothing greater can be thought, of course I accept that God exists. That definition requires it. Right? There's no mathematical way out of it. You could feel like, oh, it's confusing, I don't really believe it. So was Einstein's theory of relativity. And you could say, oh, it's too confusing, I don't believe Einstein. Well, okay, it's a free country. You can be wrong if you like. But so from a theological point of view, it makes no sense for you to deny that God exists, because you're denying that there's something than which nothing greater can be thought. And that's just mathematically a requirement. Hence the pizza argument. For folks that were confused why I shifted from the concept of God to pizza, I was pointing out that if there are pizzas, there has to be a greatest pizza. That's just mathematically required. Whether it's in Eagle River or not, well, actually it would be. There would be a greatest pizza in Eagle River if there are pizzas in Eagle River. A worse one, a worse tasting one. Is there a greenest thing? Well, there are green things. So of course there has to be a greenest thing. What are you talking about when you're talking about a greenest thing? That seems to be linguistically, mathematically required when we say that there are these things, and as a result we can know certain things. And remember, Aquinas and others are trying to figure out, well, what can we know for sure as human beings, and what things do we have to depend on faith? Thomas, in resolving this, says there are two wings on which we fly: reason and faith. You can't have one without the other. So that sounds kind of yin and yangish, if you like. But the interesting point for Aquinas is that if you believe in something and reason tells you it's nonsense, you have to dump it. You can't keep believing in nonsense. That's an issue, right? Reason has to take priority over faith. But the trouble, of course, is that when we are thinking about knowledge, let me ask you this. Is 0 a number? Anybody have serious thoughts on that? Probably not. Yes, Robin?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, so you're a Platonist as far as numbers actually have existence even though they're just ideas. That's by the way, mathematicians generally are Platonists, so that's a good thing, actually, if you're interested. But I mean, when we go to axioms, so P&O, how do I spell axiom? I need an I in there. So, the first axiom, 0 is a number. There you go. And by the way, if you don't believe in the axioms that P&O gives us, which he gives us here, you can't do mathematics. It's like playing football without believing the rules of the game. Oh, I'm going to run outside of the boundary, and get around, the defense, so that I could score a touchdown. No, you're out of bounds. No, I don't believe in that. No, that's not going to work. You can't play the game unless you follow the rules. Same thing with mathematics. There are different types of mathematics, and as a result, we now know you could get different types of rules. Remember, if you're dealing with the geometry of curved spaces, you'll literally have triangles because you don't have right angles. However, how do we know that 0 is a natural number?
Isn't saying that 0 is a number is accepting that nothing is something?
That would be interesting, is a dilemma. My answer, though, is you have to take the axioms which are undoubtable. You can't doubt these. But there's no proof for the axioms. In other words, you have to take the axioms on faith. You see the point that I'm trying to make, and this is what Aquinas is talking about. You have to have faith in certain axiom. Axiom means undoubtable in Greek, right? So you basically have to believe the undoubtable things. And by the way, once you have your axioms, then you can have definitions based on those, and then based on those definitions, then you can have propositions which you can determine are true or false, right? And that's because it's just a deductive system from that point on. But the point, of course, is that the whole stack of cards, if you will, or a castle of cards, or whatever, when you're, is based on a faith on the axioms that you're using for the system, the rules of the game. If you're watching Harry Potter, you can't just say, "Wait a minute, he can't do that's just a stick," No, people are going to chase you out of the movie theater. You've got to enjoy the movie. If you're going to enjoy the movie, you've got to accept the nonsensical axioms that go with the fictitious story. And so when people step out of that and say, "Well, could Harry Potter beat Luke Skywalker in a duel?" What are you doing? You're looking at two different models here, and you're trying to say, what's the reality between them? There is no reality between them. They're two different fictitious sets of games, right? And if you want, you can create a new meta world. Not Elon Musk, who's the one that gives us meta. That's Zuckerberg. Thank you. We've been zucked. That's the name of a book, by the way. Zucked. But in any case, you see, we've got all these different models that are very useful for that particular set of things that we do with it. But don't confuse those models with something that you might think is reality. Remember, I've been playing with that right from the get-go with the solar system versus the geocentric system, versus et cetera, right? We conceive of these models. They're very useful for us. Can we confuse them and say that, well, mathematics, because it's so useful, is therefore reality? Well, in a sense, it's just a computer code that you're using in order to accomplish the tasks. But thinking that because it's so useful and applies to practically everything, maybe it does apply to everything, doesn't mean that it's there for reality. Because we don't have a way of getting outside of our conscious schemas in order to say what is out there, right? Well, so he's creating a schema that doubles the complexity of things, and it creates all kinds of problems. And including the existence of God. That the existence of God is self-evident. I mentioned that besides the ontological argument for the existence of God, there were two other types of arguments defined by Immanuel Kant. The one is the cosmological, and Aquinas uses that, and those come from, and so he's talking about first principles. Notice he's referring to the philosopher, and of course, the philosopher is Aristotle. So when we talk about the existence of God, what is God? What is the dogmatic conception of God? And of course, what is the Trinity and all that? But so we can demonstrate, though, that things can be demonstrated in two ways. It's self-evident. And this is interesting because for those who are following along, it's self-evident. You get it, right? But for those that are not following us along and are confused about what we're doing, well, it's not self-evident to them. And that's okay, right? Not everybody is meant to get their degree. Not everybody gets to become a priest or, a bishop, right? So it's self-evident to us, but not, but some things are not known to us. So that could be confusing in who you're talking about, right? But God exists in general and can be demonstrated in different ways. And so what are those ways that God can be demonstrated? The cosmological is the one where you're looking at the cosmos. And that means the causes. So we can look at the various causes that are something that we know. We know that there's these things, thanks to the philosopher. We know that there's cause and effect. And I can mention here the book I'm reading by Robert Sapolsky, which is Determined. He's giving great examples of contemporary science and describing all the causes and effect that go into the workings of the brain, and how we make decisions and so on. And all of that certainly is true. And that's a model, the scientific model that says there's always cause and effect for everything, even if we don't know what the particular causes are, and even all the effects are. Nonetheless, according to this model, you can't have miracles, right? And free will would be a miracle, right? So that's the model he's using, and so far I haven't seen anything to argue with. In fact, his information is startlingly interesting as I'm reading through the book. But in the back of my mind, there's clearly this sense that he's missing the point, though, that free will is important when we're thinking about our own agency and our responsibility for things. If I'm thinking that every choice I make and everything I do is a result of the previous causes and effects, which, by the way, in a good sense of understanding free agency, it's important that everything is deterministic, because otherwise, if I decide, well, I'm going to throw my key up in the air and catch it when it comes down, in a non-deterministic world, I might throw my key up and it never comes back down. Now I'm locked out of my car, right? That would be pretty awful. So I'm dependent on the deterministic cause and effect relationships for my free choices to actually be effective, right? But it's two different models. I have a model for my free agency where I'm responsible for what I did, even if it turns out that I had fetal alcohol spectrum disorder and I was abused and I was in poverty, and but it's still my fault in the model that says I made my choice, right? What he clearly wants to do is move away from that, but the thing is, at this point, I don't see how you can do it successfully, because we have to think of ourselves as responsible for the choices we make. We don't have an alternative model that will replace that. But cause and effect turns out to be a way for us to see that in, he'll say 5 ways, right? There's 5 ways. The first 4 are the cosmological ones, and I think I mentioned that the 5th one for Aquinas is the teleological one, the one of design. We look at the world as it is and we see how marvelously it's been arranged for everything to work perfectly, in a matter of speaking, right? And in that sense, there had to be a designer. Even if you think today, the folks that, I think they're mostly in Kansas, that want to argue with the educational system that insists on teaching that evolution is a biological set of processes, even though by the way, there's hundreds of ways of understanding of that. And if you're interested, fantastic book that talks about that is by Stephen Jay Gould, who died. He was only 68, but he died. But still, this little book, which is 1,000.